All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Road to 18-inch arms. I have two guests here with me today, two of my coworkers. By coworkers, I mean cats. I have some good questions here. If you hear some noise in about 5 minutes when their automatic feeders go off, just ignore that. But really good questions from the Instagram Q&A that I'm going to continue on here. So first question, what's the point of doing short and bias lifts, something like a leg extension that's harder at the top? So the biggest thing with short and bias lifts and dictating resistance profiles overall, my personal belief is that if a lift is length and biased, depending on what lift it is, but I'd say the majority of lifts that are length and biased are going to be generally better for growth overall. I also think another factor here is regional hypertrophy. We don't know a whole ton about this, but I think ignoring an entire resistance profile altogether across the board in your training probably isn't the smartest idea if you are trying to be a little bit more maximalist with your training. So just a personal anecdote here. There is some evidence to this, by the way. There is some evidence showing that a length and biased lift in something like the biceps will bias the distal part of the biceps, so closer to your elbow, and something that's short and biased might bias the proximal part, so the top half closer to your shoulder of your bicep. So I can speak from personal experience with preacher curls. It's a length and biased lift. After I do that lift, and I go hard on these, I have a lot of experience with them, I have a pretty sizable pump at the bottom of my bicep near my elbow. It's not like the tendon or just the elbow in general. It's really just the bottom third or bottom half, excuse me, of my bicep. And I feel absolutely nothing, like internally or to the touch, towards the top of the bicep. So I do think there is regional hypertrophy at play. Of course, the pump isn't a perfect metric, but I think for even something like the pump to have that big of a difference from one area to another of the same muscle, I think that says something. So I do think having a variety of resistance profiles in your training is worthwhile, but if I had to pick one, I'd always go with a length and bias lift. Next question, preacher curls before or after contraction focused movements. So this is kind of an unpopular opinion. I like to do my length and bias stuff first. I know if you kind of look at it logically, if you do the short position first, that's the final part of the concentric. So in theory, you should fatigue that first and train it first, then get into your length and bias stuff. That's challenging at the start of the concentric. But I think with length and bias lifts being the lifts that are going to probably build the most muscle, I think you should do those guys first. That's really all there is to my philosophy on that. But I think that checks out. I think that makes sense. Next question, speaking of forearms, what are more movements for them? So I would say for forearms, the bread and butter for anyone's forearm growth is going to be finger curls with a barbell. I would say stretch wrist curls are also great, hammer curls, and easy bar reverse curls. I like to have the thumbs under on that, so the wrist flexors aren't a limiting factor. You're just training the brachialis and radiobrachialis. Next question, how to make training more time efficient? Selectorized machines are going to be huge here, same with dumbbells and cables. This way you don't have to waste all your time loading up a bunch of plates onto a barbell or a plate-loaded machine. If you have access to this stuff, that's easily going to be the biggest dictating factor in this. I would also say if you're a procrastinator, like somebody I know, aka myself, setting a timer at the start of your workout for how long it should take you is always key. It adds some sense of urgency, even if it's just kind of like a gimmicky little hack. I think it actually works. Next question, thoughts on minimalist lower body training with quote-unquote maximalist upper body training. I'm a pretty big fan of this. I think this is kind of reminiscent of silver and golden era bodybuilders where the upper body was just more impressive. I think in the modern day where legs and shoulders kind of take priority, that's cool and all, but I think if you want just kind of like an overall classic physique, I think more attention needs to go to the back, the chest, the arms, a little bit to the shoulders, and of course a decent amount, but not overriding amount on the legs. So I'm all for this. I have a couple programs releasing soon, not going to speak too much on that both kind of take that philosophy of more of a maximalist upper body approach and a more quote-unquote minimalist lower body approach into account there. And Barbell Apparel's Memorial Day sale is officially on right now. You can get any pair of pants for just $99 for a limited time. Lifetime guarantee for peace of mind. You're not buying cheap pants that are going to fall apart within the next few months. These are going to last you a lifetime. It's a lifetime guarantee. You're investing in a quality piece of clothing. I wear these things every single day, whether it's the pants, whether it's the tops, and they are perfect. I absolutely love them. That's why I promote them. They'll replace it if you break it, no questions asked. If you gain weight or lose weight and you need a new size at some point, you can swap for a new size, no questions asked. Next question, do you think getting 18-inch arms, yep, there they go. Do you think getting 18-inch arms has drastically improved your physique? So first off, I don't have 18-inch arms. They're 17.75. Very close, I know. It's kind of nitpicky here. So I do think it's drastically improved my physique, especially because my arms are a weak spot before. With that said, there are some muscle groups that I think have fallen off a little bit on my own physique personally. Part of that could just be from bulking and having excess body fat, and part of it could be just from not being as mentally dialed in there. So something like the traps and the delts, I think, have kind of taken a hit in my own training. The lats, the arms, the chest have really taken the priority, at least for me psychologically. So now that I'm starting to implement a lot more at least focus and better programming to my lats, not to my lats, to my traps and to my delts, I think that's going to make a pretty big difference. And I think once my physique is a little bit more well-rounded, just having a good physique but with like arms as the strong point, that's a total game changer. I think the way that I look right now is easily the best I've ever looked, even though I am like 20, 21, 22% body fat, like peak bulk, like round face and everything. I'm still pretty happy with it, especially the arms. Next question, how much stability is enough, quote unquote, to get gains from an exercise? So you don't even need that much stability just to get gains. But I would say if you're looking at realistically the gains that we're all after here, you just need a very good opposing force on each lift. So something like a preacher curl, and this is especially true as you get stronger. So like a preacher curl that you're seeing me do right here, there's the pad behind my elbows, so I can go as heavy as I want, and my elbows won't shift anywhere since the pad is there to support them. That is an excellent example of good stability on an exercise. I've used this example a bunch of times in the past, but if I was to compare a preacher curl to, say, a standing easy bar curl with the same grip and setup and everything, with that, of course, the weight is going to be shifting around and moving around my center of mass, so it's just by nature a less stable lift, especially as you get stronger. So in my personal lifting philosophy, the stronger you get, the heavier weights you're using, the more stability is going to be important. If you're a beginner and you're using light weights, that is just not going to change the stability factor that much. But the bigger and the stronger you are, the heavier weights that you need to use in your training, the more important stability is. People will usually use stability as kind of an excuse for not to do like a dumbbell bench or a barbell bench. And while these lifts aren't my favorite lifts, I think the stability is probably not as big of a deal here, since you're pressing perpendicular to the bench that's supporting your entire body. So it's still a very stable lift, even though you have to like overcome the actual stability of the bar, the dumbbell that you're pressing. So it's not perfectly stable, but it is very stable, and it is a worthwhile lift or lifts to be using. When it comes to lifts that are unstable, that would be like a heavy non-back supported overhead extension or a heavy standing barbell curl, something like that. Those lifts are going to be generally unstable lifts that you might want to swap out for something more stable, like a back support overhead extension or a preacher curl or even a spider curl or something along the lines of that. So next question, when do you stop a bulk? What are the indicators that one should stop? I'm having a hard time understanding this question. No, but in reality, what I'd say is when it comes to bulking, you generally want to stop around 20%, maybe low 20s for body fat percentage. So this, of course, is going to be impossible to directly read. There are, of course, like smart scales and variations of that can give you an estimate. But what I would say for this is when you feel that you're gaining a little bit too much fat and you're being objective with it, so taking measurements, seeing how much your waist is increased, seeing how much total body weight you've gained over a certain amount of time, I would say progress pictures are also very important here. And then another big one is just overall diet fatigue. If you feel like your appetite is completely gone and it's just non-existent, you're having a hard time gaining weight and even just getting enough food in, that can be a pretty good indicator that you have enough fat storage on your body and you've been bulking for long enough. Some people will have obviously some form of body dysmorphia, which can kind of blur that entire thing, at least as far as how you feel or how you estimate your current body fat percentage. So maybe having like a friend or a coach to help you out with that can be very helpful. Next question, is there a meaningful difference between training a muscle group once in 3 days versus every 5 days? So with this, I would say yes, there probably is going to be a difference. I think when it comes to frequency, you basically just have to find that sweet spot to where you're not waiting too long to train that muscle again, because the longer muscles are either basically anabolic or catabolic. So you're either growing or they're slowly shrinking. And this isn't a fear monger or anything, that's just how it works. If you train on a lower frequency program, you can absolutely still make gains. And that's just because the stimulus that you can create can just override the actual little bit of catabolism that's going on. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But it is something that you should take into account, and that's why you can't just train like once a month or something like that, or once every 2 weeks. A muscle should be trained, I'd say, somewhere between every other day and every 4 to 5 days. Any less than that probably isn't ideal, even if bro splits have worked in a lot of cases. So basically, to answer this question, I would say if I had to pick between training a muscle every 3 days or every 5 days, I would pick every 3 days, because with this, you have enough time to recover from one session to another. And I'm not talking about the muscles, I'm talking about like your joints. So that allows you enough time, but it's not so long to where you're really going to experience a ton of muscle growth breakdown. This is kind of a unique example, actually. I'm not sure why you asked this amount in particular, once every 3 or 5 days, but I do have a few clients that are running basically a rotating push-pull leg split, where it's a 6-day program, but you train 5 days a week. So every muscle's trained every 3 days, and then once on every third week, you wait five days in between, because you're just training 5 days a week. Next question, what do you think is a good year-to-year amount of growth teens who lift should expect? So this is where it gets tricky, because everybody that's gaining muscle is coming at it from a different starting point, and that makes it extremely difficult to measure, especially at the start, because everybody has a different body fat percentage and whatnot. So if someone's like an overweight 13-year-old that's starting to grow and lift and everything, that's going to be completely different than like a skinny fat or just like a lean like former athlete that's 18 or 19 that's just already athletic and starting out in the gym. So it's tough to say exactly, but what I would do is compare yourself to not one person, but I would compare yourself to people that are generally about the age that you're at, and there's a major difference between a 13, 14, 15-year-old and like an 18, 19-year-old. Those are completely different times of your life, especially with how your body works. So I would say if you're a teenager, compare yourself to the majority of people your age. So whether it's people within your high school or whether it's people on social media, that can be a little weird, because on social media, especially at that age, a lot of those guys, they do just use camera tricks, whether it's like turning their phone sideways and like tilting it, or using Photoshop, or this crazy lighting, or the wide angle lenses or whatever. It's kind of a nightmare. So honestly, I would just avoid social media altogether at that age, unless it's like informative type content. But compare yourself to your peers, compare yourself to anyone else that lifts at your high school. I don't know if you're on the football team or something, but pay attention to how those guys are growing, and that's usually a pretty good reference, because those guys are all in a group, they all train hard, and they all follow a program. So use those guys for reference. That's probably my best advice for that. And final question for today, for a body part, is it better to do more sets of the same exercises, or more exercises but less sets per? So this ultimately comes down to your split. And what I mean by that is, say you're on a bro split. If you're on a bro split where you're training one muscle group per day roughly, with this, there's no need to just stick with one lift and just keep banging out sets on that. If you were, say, going in to do chest, would you just go and do like 7 sets of dumbbell bench and call it a day? No, that doesn't really make sense. It's like you have the space in that day to add variety, so variety makes sense. And the reason why variety makes sense is because, one, it can reduce overuse injuries, and two, regional hypertrophy, just like how we started this video out. I do think regional hypertrophy is a thing, especially in cases like like the chest, where you have like a clearly defined lower versus upper chest. And then other muscle groups like the hamstrings, where they're going to be biarticulate, so you want to train it from multiple angles, basically, to put it simply. With this, it makes a lot of sense to have variety. So if you're on something like a bro split or a push-pull legs or something like that, where your frequency is a little bit lower and you're not training a whole ton of muscle groups every session, that makes a lot of sense to go for variety over just volume on one specific lift. But if you're on an upper lower split or a full body split, then when you're trying to add variety, this just turns into a nightmare. One, just program wise, you're going to have like 15 lifts per session, especially on a full body. And two, just in a practical sense, it's going to be very difficult to set up that many lifts, warm up for that many lifts, hope that many lifts are even open at your gym, assuming you're training at a commercial gym. So just in a practical sense, it doesn't make sense. But then just psychologically, could you imagine trying to like master a lift when you have 15 or 12 different lifts in one session? It's going to be very tricky. Your brain's going to be all over the place. You're going to be thinking about the other lifts you have when you're doing one lift. And in the vast majority, if not all cases, this is going to turn into a classic case of quantity over quality. It's just how our minds work, and I think that can apply to basically all of us. So with that said, that's all I've got for today. If you have any questions, keep an eye out on my next Instagram story. You can follow me, basement.bodybuilding, or you can just post the questions in the comments of this video. I haven't included the YouTube questions yet, but I plan on doing that for one of the next episodes. So thanks for watching. See you guys soon.